Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter number 6, verse number 2. The verse gives a very deflecting understanding, an understanding that deflects any ordinary mind at the first instance. The verse mentions that whosoever shall relinquish all resolve means all kind of determinations, shall be the only one that shall be able to gather the status of a sannyasi and a yogi. Because a sannyasi graduates, automatically merges into the dimension of a yogi. The word yogi means the one human entity that has completely dissipated into the realms of the highest dimension of higher consciousness. That is known as a yogi. Now, the sloka, the verse, gives a mention that unless you relinquish all your resolves, all pursuits that you have in your mind, you shall not be able to gather the status or the eligibility to become a sannyasi and thereafter merge into the status of a yogi. A great deflect is caused by this mere understanding on a pretext that when we associate with anything that relates to consciousness, the study of consciousness, the understanding about consciousness, especially the spiritualism, if we merely go by the words of the verse, our association with spiritualism becomes meaningless. For any ordinary human being living an ordinary life, dispensation of his or her obligation is the prime. We all want that there should be more clarity within us. We all want that our insight, our intellect should be more stable. We all want that our dormant potential, the capabilities that we bear, must arouse and should be channelized to cherish our pursuits. That's the primary objective which we have before we associate ourselves with the understanding of consciousness or spiritualism. The ultimate moksha is not the only objective for any ordinary human being while associating with such a subject. So with that kind of a primary objective, when the verse directly wants to communicate that unless you relieve your insight from all kind of resolve, you shall not be able to gather the eligibility status to become a sannyasi and thereafter get submerged as a yogi. This creates a confusion into the mind. My objective shall be totally defied if I want to pursue through spiritualism the status of a yogi. I thought that yoga means trying to merge my limited entity with a larger entity that can capacitate me to gather more and more understanding about the complexities of my life, about the complex situations that I confront, complex people that I meet, tough people that I meet, in fact, and the confused insight that I bear shall gather more effulgence, more luminosity, more clarity. Instead of that, this verse has to communicate that unless I relinquish all resolve of all kinds, I shall not be able to gather the status of a sannyasi or a yogi. It's very confusing. Yes, apparently it is confusing, but not in actual terms. Shrimad Bhagavad Gita is an esoteric knowledge. esoteric to an extent that I find it quite encrypted. It embeds much more than we can cite and understand through the mere words that express it. Each and every letter that has undergone into the construction of a word in Gita is immutable. You cannot mutate it. With such an immutable stature of the words and the letters, something deeper is being tried to convey. The great seer, the great masters of that time, who wonderfully traversed into the dimension of consciousness, to the unknown realms which you and me do not understand, were not out of their mind when they try and create such verses, such shloka, for the guidance of many, many to come. For the timeless dichotomy in Arjuna, they shall always lay down a stream of solutions and not confusions. Then there is something more for an ordinary mind to understand, go beyond the words, the apparent words. Do not take and draw the inference as prima facie from what is apparent, but try to understand more beyond that. And if I ask myself to go beyond the mere apparent words that I am able to read in the verse, I unravel a deep understanding. Let me recall once again the essence of this shlok number 2, the verse number 2, chapter 6. It says, unless you relinquish all resolve, all determination, you should not be able to gather the eligibility status of a sannyasi and then get submerged as a yogi. Unless you relinquish all resolve, which means that in order to relinquish a resolve, I must have one. Sankalpa is a word constructed out of two primary words. When you enjoin two words, Sankalpa is born. Sama and Kalpa. Sama means equitable, equal, in all respects, entirety. And Kalpa means eon, 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 an interlude of time. When your mind is possessed or your mind is experiencing any particular subject for a special interlude of time in entirety, that is called as Sankalpa. Because Sankalpa means an experience that is undergoing at the end of your mind. In all terms, when your mind is totally taken over by any subject and you are merely confined to that in pursuit of that subject, that is called as Sankalpa, which in ordinary parlance we understand as true will, we understand as determination, we understand as resolve. The more associating word at the moment is resolve. Unless you have a resolve, you cannot relinquish it. You cannot give something which you don't have. To be able to give something, you must have it first. The shlok wants us to understand that unless we have certain resolve, determined, we will not be in a status to give away them, renounce them, relinquish ourselves from them. We must also understand the first verse that precedes the second one. What is that? It has already conveyed that unless you try to execute all necessary mandatory obligations without being wishful about the fruits, without holding any expectancy, unless you are able to execute all your mandatory obligations, you shall not be able to claim the status of a sannyasi or a yogi. So in order to gather the status of a sannyasi and a yogi, you have to execute, you have to exercise all mandatory obligations of your life without expectancy. And that has been well interpreted in the last lecture of the Last Life classroom. Taking light from there and understanding the second verse, which wants to convey that unless you relinquish all resolve, you shall not be able to gather the status of a sannyasi or yogi. It obviously means that we should first of all have a list of a resolve, or few resolve, or one resolve for this life, and be determined to give our entirety to that resolve. Unless we are at that status, we shall not be able to relinquish the resolve and gather the status of a sannyasi. I must bring in an illustration in order to simplify and understand it better, because at times what happens is when you are trying to interpret certain complex statements, utterances, or complex sermons, the intellect may get misled and understand something else. So let us try to approximate to the exactness of the understanding that the great master of the unknown times is trying to communicate. The best example that I am able to associate at the moment is of a space ship, a rocket. A rocket, the objective for a rocket is to touch the sphere of the space where there is no gravity, zero gravity. It can float through at its will. But the exercise that it must undergo before being able to kiss the dimension of zero gravity, it has to undergo a very strenuous endeavor of piercing through the atmosphere and going out of the classroom of the planet. Unless it would pierce through the hemispheres atop, it shall never be able to gather the status of zero gravity and prevail into the space. So to be able to gather the status of zero gravity, it has to make great effort. It has to gather all its energies, combustion of the highest cadre, the fuel absorption at the optimum levels alone will give it a thrust that it can rise above and pierce the realms of the gravity. Likewise, unless you have that force, unless you have that ability, unless you have that kind of an energy, unless you have that kind of an appropriate resolve in you, how can you merely by pronouncement convey that yes, I have relinquished myself from all resolve? A mere utterance of that kind can be considered as a sheer rhetoric without much substance. And that's what probably has been undergoing in the spiritual parlance. Most of the people we have observed, by the change of name and garb, they make certain utterances, and their utterances are taken as something which they probably may be experiencing true. But most of the time we have found there are people of the highest caliber, indeed highest caliber, like Ramakrishna Paramahans, Acharya Sri Ram, Ma Anandamayi. We have the people of the yogis of the highest caliber, Rishi Aurobindo, and many, many more. But at the same time, there is also a large number of those people who are merely confined to their utterances. That's mere rhetoric without much substance. By merely being pretentious as a sannyasi, By merely being pretentious as a yogi, one cannot truly be a yogi. One has to undergo that process. All these people that have given name, they were true sannyasi and yogis. But to gather the status of being to that level, they had to undergo the preparation where you and me stand today. They also had their minds deflecting towards many directions. They had scintillating insights. But through their own tapasya, austerity, penance, and observations, self-analysis, self-purification that they had to undergo, they were able to gather a status where they had only one resolve for the life, and ultimately they submerged their complete existence into that resolve itself, and that remained. What we saw them was the remnant in the form of the oneness. The remnant was oneness. The entirety was oneness. The residual was oneness. Whatever it was, whether it was the remnant, residual, whatever, it was only oneness. But in able to gather that stature, one has to have one particular resolve, a powerful resolve. Unless you have a powerful resolve for your life, you cannot gather that eligibility where you submerged into it, become one with that. I have used, for example, number of times for different kind of understandings to be established in our mind. One of them is of Shri Bhagat Singh, the great martyr that we know today. Under the freedom struggle, he had to undergo a lot of atrocities, a lot of suffering that he was subjected to. The masters of the time, the British masters, they subjected him to the 3rd degree of the worst kind. With the bare body, he was made to lie down on slabs of ice, and thereupon he was subjected to hunters, whips, I don't know, whatever you may term it as, countless of them, and irrespective of an expectation that he would scream out of pain, he would rejoice. He would transcend into ecstasy and start singing certain good devotional songs or poems. This strange transmutation of the nature of his physical bearance, physical bearing, and his reaction through the mind towards those suffering was something which is not understood ordinarily. It was something extraordinary. But one thing is very clear: whatever transmutation his entire existence underwent was only because of one pretext, that he was living one resolve. And while living that resolve, a oneness appeared between his individual entity and the resolve to such an extent, the submersion was to such an extent that his entire physical and mental existence transmutated into a new reality. And that new reality was of a yogi. Bhagat Singh became a yogi. He was a yogi. He was beyond subjection to physical torture or mental fear. Generally, people, as it has been observed, undergo a lot of turbulence, a lot of pain when they know that they will be subjected to capital punishment. But for him, capital punishment was nothing but a moment to rejoice, to actualize the purpose of his being on this planet. Such a state is the one where you can say, when you can claim that yes, he relinquished his resolve because that oneness remained. When the oneness is there, there's nothing left to be even relinquished. The great master of the unknown times, Muni Vedvyas, is trying to communicate that we also have to give ourselves the status of having such a indomitable spirit, such a deep resolve. For that we have to segregate. I wrote a book a couple of years ago upon the subject. It was sort of a training manual in order to enable one discriminate between the countless desires and the one that we must give ourselves to, the true will. The name of the book was Desire to True Will. The transformation of any ordinary desire towards the indomitable, the unfathomable power of the will. Desire to true will. The great understanding that we draw from this verse is, first of all, we must enlist all our wandering desires, pick up those which are meaningful and that should be taken as the pursuit of this life. Among those, then further segregate and give ourselves to them that have noble ends, not ignoble. Ignoble means something which is tamasic, born with inertia, born with something which is destructive, or rajasic, merely subjected towards aggression. Instead of that, we must give ourselves towards sattvic resolves that ensure progression for us and for people around through us. Once we give ourselves sattvic resolves and live them through the exercise of regular evaluation of our own conduct that we term as introspection and self-purification, upon the understanding that we draw, we gather through the personal introspection, the journey towards becoming a sannyasi and yogi shall not be compromised. While saying, I equally understand out of my own personal experience that the voyage towards becoming a yogi or a sannyasi in spiritual aspects is not easy. It's very arduous. To an extent that I have termed it as a game of snake and ladder. The indoor game that we generally play, snake and ladder. You play your side and you go on to the escalator, rising above. It happens that before the last culmination, you are bitten by the great snake, and then again you have to come down, you are dropped down, degraduate towards this primary level of the first stage. But again you make your preparations, you gear up, you gather yourself and start once again. Even if the fall is for the 100th time, yet you have no option but to rise above again and start moving upwards. The journey of a human life in spiritualism is also quite similar. The rise and the fall. The passage of fall at times is very prolonged. And the duration of rise that we experience within ourselves, when we feel very ecstatic, when we feel more clear, when we feel more in touch with something higher, they're short-lived. But the passages when there is nothing happening, rather we give up certain practices that we generally follow for a long passage of time in order to recall them at some point. Oh, 6 months ago I was experiencing abundance within myself. There was something different going within me, but since last 6 months, I've been just dragging my individuality. Such sighs are certainly, SIGHS, are certainly going to abrupt your common living. But this is how it goes in the spiritual, the evolution and the spiritual aspects of human life. The rise and the passage of the lows or the falls, pitfalls, they keep going. Whatever the case may be, irrespective of that, we must take stock of all the wandering desires that we have in our idiotic box. Once you have the complete stock of all wandering desires, unfulfilled desires, dreams, aspirations, whatever you may term it, unless we have the complete stock of them, unless we are able to first make the first scrutiny, the first level of inspection, the first level of sampling, where we relinquish ourselves from those wandering ones and we gather few meaningful ones. And then we again conduct the second round where we still refine and extract the most meaningful ones and take them as resolve and start living them. That point should never arrive where we can have a submersion that has been termed here in this shloka as asanasta sankalpa, where you can say that I have given away now even the resolve, because me and resolve are one. The oneness has surfaced. In the capacity of a teacher, while understanding the subject to be able to teach others, I did try to find out, where do I stand? Yes, I do not stand the point where the shloka has mentioned. I really do not stand there. But yes, I'm happy to understand that yes, I am in the journey. I'm moving. At least I'm not stopped. I'm moving. I may not be there where the yogi wants us to be. But yes, I'm en route. I'm on the way. Where? Exactly where? I don't know. But yes, I'm moving. And that affirmation should be there within each one of us. Yes, we are moving. We are not there yet. Yes, we know we are not there yet. The journey may be long. But yes, let's gratify, not satisfy at the moment, because satisfaction is something more higher. At least gratification should be there. Because right now we are living at the end of the sensory organs. So gratification is the more appropriate word. Let's at least gratify our common understanding by merely affirming that yes, we are moving. We are en route. We are neither going back nor it's status quo. We're moving, we are inching. Maybe inching, but we're moving. That's all for the second verse of chapter number 6. I made a promise to publish PDF notes as well upon all, and very shortly we shall be publishing the PDF notes in English for each and every single verse that can be, then the true seekers can make avail from the links that shall be provided at dineshji.com/notes. Till then, till the next classroom with the next verse, which is further going to carry a lot of light from the verse number 2. Till then, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om.